Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is headed to the US for talks with President Trump. It's his first visit to Washington since relations soured over the killing of regime critic Jamal Khashoggi in 2018. The prince is expected to sign nuclear and defense deals, including the purchase of advanced fighter jets. That has alarmed Israel, but Trump will also push the kingdom to normalize ties with Israel to boost stability in the Middle East.
Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is hoping for a bigger role on the world stage as he works to realize his ambitious plan to transform Saudi Arabia. And the kingdom's relationship with the US is crucial to that.
Your Excellency, Mr. President, the common work doesn't only include the economic cooperation, but extends to bringing security and peace to the region and the world.
When the Crown Prince hosted Trump in Riyadh in May, Saudi Arabia pledged to invest over $600 billion in the US and to buy over $140 billion worth of US-made weapons. And Saudi Arabia is hoping that these, the latest F-35 fighter jets, will be among them. On Monday, Trump said he would approve the sale. Analysts say that besides weapons, the Crown Prince is also hoping for security guarantees from the US, a long-standing ally, in a region beset by wars. And one of the most destructive wars in the region is Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza. As international concern over the death and destruction mounted, Saudi Arabia tried to rally Arab and Islamic countries with summits aimed at ending the conflict. And it has been pushing for the creation of a Palestinian state.
The kingdom will not stop its tireless work towards the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. And we affirm that the kingdom will not establish diplomatic relations with Israel without that.
With the fragile ceasefire in Gaza holding, the US wants its Arab partners to normalize relations with its biggest ally in the Middle East, Israel. And Trump is hoping to persuade Saudi Arabia to join an accord that he set up in his first term that does just that.
Part of that conversation, perhaps getting the Abraham Accords, getting Saudi Arabia.
And the Abraham Accords will be a part. We're going to be discussing. I hope that Saudi Arabia will be going into the Abraham Accords fairly shortly.
The talks in Washington might yield more than just defense and security agreements, as both Trump and the Crown Prince seek to be remembered as leaders who resolved one of the Middle East's longest-standing conflicts.
And we are joined now by Cinzia Bianco, a visiting fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations and an expert on Gulf states. Thank you so much for joining us. Donald Trump, we heard saying there, would sell F-35 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia. We might even see a deal made today. Currently, only Israel operates America's most advanced fighter in the region. Do you see this shifting the balance of power now in the Middle East?
Yes, definitely. The Saudis have been watching very closely what Israel has been doing over the past few months, and in particular the 12 days war against Iran. And they have concluded that one reason why Israel was relatively successful in that war is that they were able to take out Iran's air defenses very quickly. And a big part of that was using F-35's jets because of their stealth capacity. So they do want those jets. They've been wanting them for a long time, and now they want them more. But there is the issue of only Israel can have the highest quality of U.S. weapons. And this issue remains as long as there is this special relationship, and alongside concerns of U.S. relations with China that we have heard coming up again in the Senate over the past few days.
You know, Saudi Arabia has always been important to U.S. interests in the Middle East. Can you talk with us a little bit about where that stands right now under the Trump administration and how it's been evolving?
It is even more important now because Trump is going ahead with the idea of the US relinquishing some of its responsibilities for security in the region and geopolitical work in the region to its allies and its partners. And so Saudi Arabia is a big player there because it is stable, because it is wealthy, because it has credibility that is built upon its role as custodian of the two holy mosques, and has relations with all of the key players globally and regionally. And so Trump sees Saudi Arabia as part of its plan that is a priority to him to relinquish some responsibility that the US no longer wants to undertake on its own entirely in the Middle East.
Let's drill down deeper into what's happening here geopolitically, and I'd like to expand and talk a bit about China as well, because China has been gaining ground in Saudi Arabia, China being Washington's primary systemic rival. Is part of this meeting with MBS heading to Washington about ensuring the U.S. maintains its influence in Saudi Arabia?
Yes, I mean, this is a complex one because the concern about Saudi relations with China has been longstanding. Already the Biden administration was, even more concerned than the Trump administration, because under Biden, Saudi Arabia was getting even closer to China, and also in areas that were very sensitive, like defense, like even discussing the idea of going beyond the dollar as the major vehicle for their economic relations. And China remains Saudi Arabia's most important economic partner and its biggest client for oil. So it is an essential relationship, the one that the Saudis have with China. But under Trump has been even more forceful to the Saudis to say that he doesn't want to see them getting closer to China in very sensitive areas. And for example, on technology, unless the Saudis would indicate that they would take a step back on some of the deals and the cooperation that they had in mind with China, that Trump would not give them the possibility to purchase semiconductors, the most advanced semiconductors that are made in the US and that are essential for countries like Saudi Arabia that have big AI ambitions. And so Trump is really more forceful than Biden before him, and is trying to get the Saudis to really take step backs with some success, I have to say.
And one of his biggest goals, of course, is that he is hoping that Saudi Arabia will join the Abraham Accords and normalize relations with Israel. The Saudis, for their part, they are insisting that they have the creation of a Palestinian state before they do so. Do you see that realistically happening?
I don't see that realistically happening right now. I don't think, there is many reasons why Saudi Arabia does not think that this is an opportune moment to establish relations to Israel. The whole region, the Arab Islamic public opinion, is shocked by what they've heard and seen happening in Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu has become the face of this conflict. And so the Saudis are really asking themselves, why not wait a few months and hope that Israeli elections give us another alternative leader to whom it's easier to get relations with. And also Saudi Arabia has been rather flabbergasted, I would say, by Israel's attack on Doha, just next door from the Saudi kingdom. So it seems really hard, although, yes, the US is pushing, and the UN resolution yesterday that sort of created for the first time in a diplomatic way a path towards a Palestinian statehood. I think it's clearly a step that the US is trying to take to encourage the Saudis and to point to them, yes, you have something that you can use to justify this normalization, but I do think it's too little.
Cinzia Bianco from the European Council on Foreign Relations, thank you so much for putting this all into the larger geopolitical context for us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we're now joined by Aziz Alghashian. He's a lecturer of international relations and researcher of Saudi foreign policy. And now, Donald Trump said he would sell F-35 stealth fighters to Saudi Arabia. At the moment, only Israel has access to this technology in the region and used them to strike Iran as well as Qatar. Would this shift the balance of power in the Middle East, you think?
Well, firstly, good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me. I think it does really address the, not only a shift, but really addresses the dynamics of balance of power. to what extent, I think the region in itself is very difficult to assess really an overarching picture of what the balance of power is due to the different forms of power asymmetries. So for example, Israel has a qualitative advantage, Iran has a quantitative advantage, Saudi Arabia has a little bit of both. So it's very difficult to really address this. But I think more overarchingly, or I think more pertinently for Saudi Arabia, I think it addresses some of the security anxieties that it has. In my opinion, I think the war, not only in the 12-day war, but also the strike on Qatar, as you mentioned rightfully, suggests that, listen, Saudi Arabia is still in a region that's very troublesome. And I think this really boosts, in my opinion, Saudi Arabia's security needs, but also it gives confidence to project that Saudi Arabia can protect its borders more efficiently, given that it is trying to attract foreign direct investment. So this security issue is not detached from the overarching economic diversification aspects that Saudi Arabia very much needs in order to move forward and develop in its region. Develop in its vision.
Now, let's have a quick look at the protocol here. Saudi Crown Prince is being greeted by a fighter jet flyover, cannon fire and a gala dinner. Just how important is Saudi Arabia to the US interests in the Middle East?
It's very important, and it has always been important. The significance of Saudi Arabia to the United States is not just about oil, but it was really geopolitically, Saudi Arabia is the biggest country in the region. Saudi Arabia is also not only this, but has a vision, in my opinion, that necessitates regional stability, and it calls for this. Other states have this vision, but I think Saudi Arabia's size, Saudi Arabia's symbolic capital, that it has some, the amount of history that Saudi Arabia has, I think suggests that it is important for any international actor to deal with Saudi Arabia. So dealing with them is very crucial. It's actually, it's necessary. It's indispensable. So I think now that was never in question. The question is really, what are the dynamics of the relationship and the cooperation? And we've seen from oil of security to now technology, tech, business, connectivity, logistics. And I think these are the things that I think, are the reasons why the United States is looking at Saudi Arabia, especially at a region that is growing in more importance in globalization, in a multipolarized kind of system.
Let me just interrupt you there. You've just outlined the many details of why Saudi Arabia is so important for the US. But does that mean that human rights abuses have taken a back seat in US-Saudi relations?
In my opinion, human rights issues has always been a sensitive touching point between Saudi Arabia and the United States. However, I'm going to make this, and maybe people won't like what I have to say. Human rights for the United States and other Western powers that want to deal with Saudi Arabia have always put human rights issues in the backseat. This is something that I think many in the region see, that when it comes down to business, they will be talking about this issue. They will be talking about this issue, but then they will be going back to business as usual. Now, for me, I think there is an issue also why that the notion of human rights or the card that they would say of human rights does not resonate much, I would say, when it comes to political discussions, is that because I think a lot of the times they sense that human rights has been politicized. This issue of trying to use human rights, and we've seen this in the previous administration with President Biden, who said, he's going to treat Saudi Arabia as a pariah, and then was willing to give Saudi Arabia a treaty. The last time Saudi Arabia or the United States gave a treaty to anybody was in 1962. So from pariah to treaty suggests that there is a very flexible kind of attachment to human rights when it comes to realpolitik.
Aziz Alghashian, lecturer of international relations and researcher of Saudi foreign policy. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.